Thanks for coming, everybody. There's a lot of entities that are trying to get your attention, and you chose to spend some time with us, and that means a lot. And over the next 35-ish minutes, I'm going to try to make it worth your while. Chances are, if you're here, it's because you're in pain. And you're in pain for maybe some reasons that you aren't quite ready to admit. Sometimes you may feel like your pain is sort of being caused internally, and some things that you are doing are either helping or increasing that pain. Perhaps there's an elephant in the room at your company that nobody really wants to talk about. You just kind of slog on through. Maybe you're starting to feel like it would be good to have some sort of professional assistance with something like that. We're here to help you out, so let's just get that issue out on the table right now. The issue is this: it's okay to talk about it. You're among friends. We're here to help you, okay? Your hard drives are a little like that conveyor belt at the grocery store. And you're putting your work on it, you've got the cereal boxes on there, and they're going down to the end, and they just sort of sit there, and they start to back up. You don't have a dude who is at the end of that conveyor belt getting stuff off of your drives and managing all that stuff. That guy doesn't exist. He's not there. You're bursting at the seams, you're flying without underpants, you're flying without a net. This is not a good way to go. I can tell you one thing: we never do it when we're not in a hurry, right? There's always some sort of pressure on us. There's always some sort of external force. There's never you're never dealing with full hard drives when you have a lot of downtime, right? And so typically one of these three things happens, one or more. And we've all done it. I've done it. It's okay to talk about it. You're among friends, everybody, all right? I think we can all admit, though, that this is kind of an unhealthy way to live. It's definitely poor hygiene, right? At this point, you may be asking yourself, who exactly is this guy who's standing up in front of you? John gave me a little bit of an introduction, but just to take a second on that, because some of you know me and some of you don't, I'm excited to say that I've been at this company for 16 years. I'm employee number 1. I take a lot of pride in that. It's one thing that keeps me coming back each day. I actually have a degree in this stuff. I have a degree with honors in broadcasting and film production from the University of Iowa. I've been doing this a long time. I was actually shooting and splicing film starting at about the age of 13. I was a professional in-the-chair editor for 12 years here in the Twin Cities, which I think gives me a great perspective when it comes to dealing with clients, solving their problems, because I used to have a lot of those same problems. And since 2005, I've been Apple certified in XN and the Macintosh operating system. I've actually been using Apple computers, the Macintosh, since it came out in 1984. So a little bit of a primer that I just wanted to cover that related to backup and archive. So I'm sure some of you are really clear on this, but just in case people aren't, I just wanted to quickly cover these two topics again, because it seems like some folks interchange the differences between backup and archive. A backup is like a spare tire. It is very much like a spare tire. You don't ever want to have to use it. You want to be able to go your whole career and retire without ever having had to use your backup. Your backup is a completely separate and independent copy of your data. A RAID is not a backup. A lot of people think that, and they've started arguments with me about it and make me feel uncomfortable. And the truth is that there is no second copy of your data that's flying around up there in that RAID or something. You know, you have the chance for data loss when you have a RAID. So some of these same folks, they sort of continue the argument and say, well, I have a RAID 1, and that's a whole second copy, isn't it? So I've got all my data on one disk, and then I've got another disk that's in a RAID 1 with that first, and since I have two copies, that's a backup, isn't it? And it's not. And it has to do with the synchronous relationship between those two drives. So if I have a file on my first disk, it's synchronized over to the second disk, I delete that file. What happens on the second disk? The file is deleted. It's not a backup. A RAID 1 is not a backup, folks. So when it comes to backup, in general, these things don't work very well, in my opinion. The first one seems pretty obvious, but just wanted to state it, that not doing anything, sort of the edit and hope, which frankly was a phase that I was in the mid-90s, working on these Avids that sometimes actually caught on fire. You know, we weren't backing up. We were editing and hoping and not really worrying about it. We were too busy. Manual backups don't work because we are human and we cannot be counted on to perform them regularly. This is a task that needs to be taken out of our hands. I would make the strong argument that copying from the Finder doesn't work, not only because it doesn't happen regularly, but for the reasons that I list here. Some people take me to task about, well, what do you mean stopping is complicated? And with that, I refer to, you just do this massive whole-scale Finder copy of all these files and folders that you're copying over to a thumb drive, external hard drive, whatever. And you have to stop that. It's not really a clean break, is it? So you get folders that copy over, and the folder's there, but not everything is inside that folder. And it's not obvious at all what got copied over and what didn't. There's no report of what you did. You have to go through and porpoise and find what was in there and see if it made it over to the copy, or you just need to start over. And obviously it ties up your machine. So a backup, really, it needs to happen automatically. We're human, we're fallible, we don't do this stuff regularly, humans are not consistent. It needs to be taken out of our hands and be done automatically. So that's backup. An archive, a lot of people think of an archive as like grandma's attic, that sort of a thing. I tend to use the toys in the middle of the living room floor analogy because I think it works pretty well. So you got all this stuff in the middle of my floor, and my kids are done with it. They're not using it anymore. They grew up, they moved on, they're driving now. And I need that stuff out of my way. I need my floor back. But I don't want to just throw this stuff away. I might need it at some point. So I want to carefully package it up, get it the heck off of my floor, and put it away somewhere safely in a way that I can find it again. I might need that again, but for the time being, I just need this space back. And that's the same kind of thing. People finish projects and they just leave them on their drives because they don't know what to do with them. And then their drives fill up and they buy more storage and they fill that up and they finish these projects and the projects just stay on their drives. And there's no mechanism for removing that from the storage that you paid all this money for and freeing it up so that you can use it again. This is not necessarily an archive because you can't, there's no index, right? You need a way to easily locate these things. You need someone like my wife who labels stuff in letters 5 feet tall before it goes up on the shelf in the closet. An archive happens manually, typically. So I don't want the system telling me when I'm done with a project or a file. I want to be telling the system, yes, I'm done with that. Get it the heck off of my drives, get it the heck off of my living room floor because I need more space. I'd like to take a minute and hate on FireWire drives. And I'd like to hate on them in general for these following reasons. One thing that a lot of folks do, and it's not the worst idea in the world, but it's an idea that kind of has a lot of holes in it, frankly. People, they fill up FireWire drives with things that they're done working on, then they put them up on a shelf, and then they have more things they need to get off of their storage, and so they copy that off to drives and put that on a shelf. I think the record I've ever seen at a customer site is 300 FireWire drives, all numbered with Sharpies and put up on the shelves. Some people are really proactive. They'll take a screenshot of the Finder and what's listed on that drive, and they'll print it out and very carefully tape it to the top and put it on there. And that's great, but you can't search for that. There's no spotlight window for all of those pieces of paper that are taped to the top of FireWire hard drives. We've all kind of gone the Walmart route on it. I'm guilty of it. I know other people are, where it's like, yeah, I got to get this stuff off my drive. Just run down to Walmart, pick up something cheap, and throw it on there. And sometimes that's your only copy. And it's this fragile disk that was supplied by the lowest bidder that has your valuable media on it that you've thrown up on a shelf. Interfaces changed, so I tended to buy a lot of drives back when FireWire 400 was a big thing because it was so cool. You could just plug these things in. Okay, it went to 800. All right, I have to buy these adapters or whatever, and now we don't even have that stuff anymore, and so I kind of have to adapt like all the way up to heaven sometimes. And you can do it, but it's just a hassle. And people tend to use them for other things. I was inspired to put that line in there from a kind of a sad story from a customer of ours who he had carefully archived all of these projects onto FireWire drives, put them on a shelf. They weren't labeled super well. He left, moved on, went to another company. New crew comes in, and they need space. So they start grabbing these things, and they were copying other stuff on them without understanding at all that this was their company's archive, and they were overwriting all this stuff. At some point, there was a realization there, but not before they lost a lot of data that they couldn't get back. I like Time Machine. I use it at home, frankly, for a lot of stuff. I like it for the following reasons here. There's a lot of positives. So in particular, I like the fact that Time Machine is automated. It takes it out of my hands, right? It does it automatically. I don't have to think about it when I'm running Time Machine. I think it's great. If I run Time Machine server using server.app, I can actually back up stuff over a network from different machines. I really like that. I think there's a lot of bad when it comes to Time Machine. Unfortunately, it's kind of limiting in what it does. In particular, the fact that you cannot pause and resume a Time Machine backup. And some people are like, well, wait a second. I can stop a Time Machine backup and pick it up again. You can, but it's going to have to start over in some capacity. So if I have a 1 terabyte file that I am backing up to another disk with Time Machine, and it's halfway through that process, because Time Machine is basically a fancy Finder copy, and I stop, Time Machine doesn't remember where I left off. It has to discard that half-copied file and start over again. And it sure seems like there would be a better way to do it, that we could have something with a little bit more intelligence. The big thing for me, though, is that it doesn't archive. And it's not designed to do that, I get that, but it's not a solution that's sort of all in one. It doesn't really scale well. It's fine for me at home, but in a professional environment, I don't think it really makes a lot of sense. So what I am here today to explain to all of you folks is that there is a better way. I think a much better way. I like to think of myself as a no BS kind of a person, kind of made that a cornerstone of my career, and I honestly believe that the better way is through the use of these things. They're tape cartridges. They go by a name that I would not have chosen. The name is linear tape open. We almost never use that phrase. We always use LTO. And the open part comes from the fact that a number of companies all came together and agreed on this standard, okay? So it's not just Sony that is dictating all of this, and Sony can just change the rules whenever they want to. So, HP, Sony, Fuji, Quantum, all these different companies came together to agree on the standard. And that kind of keeps everybody honest. It keeps things the same. It keeps the roadmap moving down in the direction that everybody sort of agreed to do that. And as John Z mentioned, all of this started to take shape in the 90s. And in 2000, it was that the first LTO generation came out, LTO 1. So it's been in place for 16 solid years, and it kind of gets a little bit better every year. So I trotted out the word tape. I said it. And there's a lot of folks that aren't particularly enamored with tape. So they look at us and they go, gee, Z Systems, you're supposed to be like this super high technology company, and now you're coming along with something that doesn't strike me as particularly high in the technology realm, and you're seriously going to tell me that the backup and archive for a tapeless environment is tape? And yes, and I can understand that you might not like that, and I understand that there's a lot of reasons that people don't like LTO. They think it's pretty old school. They don't want to spend the money on the tape drive or the hardware or whatever. They think there's going to be these massive amounts of maintenance that are involved in keeping this thing going. They don't like the idea that they are going to have to license the software, although you have to do it with Adobe and everything else now. They don't like the idea of all the upfront costs to get into LTO. They think that there's going to be all of this management of like moving tapes around and handling everything and barcodes and stuff. They think the interface sucks when they go to deal with this stuff, that it's too overly complicated. A lot of people have super bad memories dealing with these two monstrosities in our past and the limitations with them and everything. And gee, Jay, you know what? I really want the Finder. That's what I want, Jay. Can you just give me the Finder and then I'll be happy? And I understand that. And they still come back to me and they're like, you know, I don't get it. Well, you know, why are you recommending this tape here? Why are you telling me that this is such a good solution here? And I think there's honestly some very good reasons to look at it. They are much less failure prone than spinning discs. You know, there's no electronics on board. It's an inert cartridge. They have a super long shelf life compared to hard drives. So we look at something like a 25 to 30 year lifespan for these tapes. You know, that's going to take me to retirement. I know for sure. A tape library is very easily expandable, so it's not like if you buy a G-Tech RAID and you fill that thing up, I mean, there's no way to sort of like snap more storage onto that. You kind of have to buy another RAID and plug it in, but a tape environment is very easily and logically expandable, and it just has to do with the spec that was agreed on so many years ago. You can start out with something pretty small, like the single drive that sits on your desktop that's directly attached to your computer, and use one tape. But if you need to use more, that's okay. You can buy more tapes as your storage needs grow, and if you don't want to be handling them regularly with that single drive, you can actually buy a library and put all the tapes inside, and they're all just in there, and there's this robot that automatically moves the tapes around for you in and out of the drives. If you don't feel like buying a whole library, you can buy sort of part of a library and kind of start small, license only part of it, and then work your way up as your needs grow. Tapes are cheaper than hard drives. You know, if we look at the equivalent capacity here, to me there's really no argument there. One thing that I don't think a lot of people know is that LTO tape was specifically designed to overcome the weaknesses that were present in DLT and AIT, both in terms of capacity, read and write speeds, all these kind of things. Silver bullet for me on LTO tape is, for heaven's sake, it frees up your online storage. Your online storage that you paid all this money for the capacity and the speed of it and all this stuff. And there's like, when you leave these projects on there, there's kind of this crud that is lining the walls of your storage that slowly decreases the amount that you can actually use. And you just need to get that stuff off of there. You need to get those clothes and toys out of the living room floor. So there is actually a roadmap for LTO where the capacity increases. It doesn't quite double, but it approaches that with each new generation. You can expect approximately 2 to 3 years between generations, and I'm not going to be throwing a lot of graphs at people. Actually, this is the only one I'll be throwing at you. But if we look at where we are currently, we're in the 7th generation of LTO tape. We have a tape that is 6 terabytes in capacity that operates at a speed of 300 megabytes a second. So that's, what, twice that of a SATA drive when it's reading and writing? It's pretty amazing. And then in 2018, something like that, we don't really know for sure when the engineers get it together, we can expect to see the same physical size tape with a capacity of practically double that with an increase in speed. And there's enormous compatibility that has been built into each of these generations. So if I have LTO 7 equipment with an LTO tape, obviously those are going to be fully 100% compatible. So read and write. I can take an LTO 6 tape, put it into my LTO 7 equipment, and still have full read and write compatibility, 100%. I can take an LTO 5 tape that's from 6 years ago, stick it into my LTO 7 equipment, and I won't be able to write to that tape, but I will be able to read from it. So there's been some real effort and thought put into some continuity of the generations here that has really impressed me. With any kind of LTO backup and archive system, you get a searchable index, and the software that comes with the backup and archive systems, I would call it bare bones asset management. You can search for keywords. A lot of these have like still images and little preview videos built into them that you can browse. If you need to take that to the next level and have rich metadata and all these things that vendors talk about, you can tie into something like CatTV and be able to search deep for shoot dates or apertures or different cameras or whatever. Doesn't apply to a lot of customers, but there are encryption options for LTO if that is a concern of yours. And one thing I don't think a lot of people understand is that LTO tape systems use a lot less energy when it comes to looking at the same amount of storage. Less energy, happy animals. Who doesn't like happy animals? So at this point, you may be saying, okay, I'm intrigued. What's involved? What does it look like? And it starts out pretty simply. On a small scale, it starts out with a computer, which can be a Mac or a PC. It can be a Linux machine, actually, too. And in simple terms, that computer could be sitting on your desktop, and it is attached to a single standalone LTO drive. Boom. Put some software on your computer, and you are in business to back up and archive using LTO. It's kind of that simple. If you have larger needs, like let's say you're in a facility with multiple editors, chances are you're on shared storage. Shared storage I always think of as a real cornerstone to a facility. The great thing about associating that with a backup and archive system is all of your data has been centralized. It's in one place. We are working with a customer right now. They have 6 edit suites, and all the storage is local. And they've got like 12 to 16 terabytes in each room. And they want to put in centralized backup and archive. And we can do that, but we're going to have to reach through the network out to each individual machine. So you can still do it, but it just complicates things. The transfer times, the speed of the backup, all of that is going to be affected because we don't have the data in one place. So it's preferred, but not necessary to have it all in one place. So what we do is we take that and we add, once again, Mac, PC, Linux machine onto your central storage as another client. And then that server is directly attached to the LTO hardware. And you're in business. You may ask yourself, how do I work this? How do I use LTO? I get that I can back up and archive with it, but there's got to be other ways, there's got to be other methods. There's plenty of other things that you can do to it that aren't strictly backup and archive. So there's a pre-archiving strategy, which I recommend a lot. As an editor, I would be like in the chair, sitting in front of my system, and stuff comes in from a chute. And depending on the size of the chute, it's a little like incoming mortar fire, isn't it? It's like all these card images just start descending on me. I've had FireWire drives FedEx to me. I've had laptops FedEx to me. And just the data is on the laptop. There's just card images on there. I've had people that I don't know just like walk into the edit suite, hand me a naked hard drive, like they're holding a bare hard drive in their hands. Here it is, get the data off of it. Not too static safe, but I guess they made it work. And one thing that I want to do right away is I've got all the stuff that's come in from these different sources, and I want to safeguard this stuff. So one thing that we really recommend to people if they're dealing with a lot of card images is before they start editing, before anybody touches this data, they take these card images and they write them out to an LTO archive. And then they take those tapes out of their system, label them carefully, and put them up on a shelf. I come from the beta tape mentality, and I really liked being able to turn around to my shelf of beta tapes and pull something down and pop it in and reload if necessary. It's that same kind of mentality. So those card images, they aren't taking up storage. I'm not going to be using those anyway. The ones that I do need, I'm going to leave on my system, but I know that I've got all of them safeguarded, sitting up on the shelf with an easily searchable database so that I can get back to them. We have some customers who are worried about bad things happening. They're worried about lightning coming through their facility. We have some customers who routinely lose power several times a year. They're out in the warehouse district in downtown Minneapolis or something like that. They're not on UPSs. We have had customers who are worried about malicious employees. People get pissed off and they decide to do something on their way out the door. I can understand that. So one strategy that we recommend for these kinds of situations is to use multiple tape sets. So you can set yourself up with something that stays in your facility that you are actively using, but then you have a second set that is stored offline. It's a mirror of what you're working with online. Maybe you trade those out once a month just to evenly wear the tapes, that sort of a thing. Maybe you're the kind of person who wants to be able to do multiple things at once, multitask. So these libraries that I showed you the picture of, you can put multiple tape drives in them. Some of them, you can put 10 tape drives in them and do multiple things at the same time. So if you have a guy who is sort of like your digital assistant and he is going to be archiving constantly, you still want those backups to be running, you can install 2 drives and back up and archive at the same time. If you're worried about those malicious employees or you have a lot of freelancers coming through that look a little dodgy, I understand. You can add a 3rd drive and create on-site and off-site archives at the same time as you're doing backups. Well, gee, what happens if I need to be restoring card images while I'm doing all this other stuff? You can add in another drive and keep doing that. It's all modular, right? It's all like Lego blocks. You can just sort of build it up to what you need. And the software works the same way too. You can start out small. We're big fans of this company, Arkaware. They are like me, they are German. They like things very organized. They make backup and archive software. You don't have to buy the whole kit and caboodle. You can buy just the one or the other, start small, and then add on as your needs grow. Let's take a quick look at a case study, customer of ours. They're a major ad agency in downtown Minneapolis, and they had needs. They had 4 edit suites that were all on shared storage, and they needed to be able to back up and archive at the same time. They've got 64 terabytes. There's a lot of projects coming through on a regular basis. Jay, how can we do that? Well, we licked that problem. What we did is we took a leftover Mac Pro machine. We made it a client on their SAN, in which, in their case, it's a DDP, and we directly attached the backup and archive hardware to that. And it was that simple. We didn't even have to buy a new machine, so they made the transition to the trash can Macs. These silver Mac Pros still work awesome. I mean, the backup and archive software, it's not like doing an After Effects project, folks. You don't need anything that's terribly beefy in order to do this. So it's quite often that we can get away with secondhand machines. We made another SAN client. We directly attach it to the storage. They still have their 4 editors who can be working away. And we set the backup server up on a screen share so that anybody can dial into it if they need to and be able to work with the backups of the archives. So we've got 80 tapes that are available at all times, half given over to the backup, half to the archive. They have 2 drives in this system. I think the box holds 4 drives, something like that. They only need 2 for right now, so they can back up and archive at the same time. We configure the system so that it emails us automatically if there's trouble. They have us on a service contract, so we then have the luxury of going and looking for trouble with this machine. We can remote into it every week and see how things are going, and they have us out once a month to swap tapes. Their storage typically runs at 65 to 70% capacity. One thing that never happens in a post-production environment is a project will just drop out of the sky and you have to try and figure out where in the world you're going to put it on your storage, right? They don't have that problem because they are keeping their storage clean and clear, okay? They are practicing good hygiene. They finish a project, they move it off of their expensive storage onto a tape that they can get back to easily if they need to. They spend really a minimal amount of time archiving because they're on top of the situation. And then we come in once a month and we rotate their tapes. And the guy says he never has to think about backups. They just happen, which is what should be happening with backups. I'd like to take a second and talk about these 4 letters, because I think there's been a little bit of confusion surrounding them, exactly what they mean and what's different about them and whatnot. And so I would like to start with a scenario. And the scenario is, I'm a guy at a post facility, and I have my LTO-7 archive system. And I have a card image that I've archived onto an LTO tape. And I take that and I give it to my friend who's at a different facility across town. He sticks it into his archive system that is running the exact same software as mine, and he will not be able to read that data. It would be like there's this unintelligible gibberish on it, like he's trying to read Klingon off of this thing or something. And the reality of LTO is that the data that's on the tape cartridge is wholly dependent on the cataloging software that is running that system. Okay? My friend across town, he does not have that same catalog. He may have the same software, but he doesn't have that same database. The database keeps track of what's on the tape and allows you to search for it and whatnot. The detractors of LTO will claim that this is some kind of like dirty little secret or bad idea or whatever, and I don't think anybody makes a secret of it at all. LTO tape does not have a file system on it. So there's no HFS Plus or NTFS that's on that tape. And some people really want that. People at smaller shops, they feel like that would fit in their workflow. They're like, Jay, I want to be able to sit down at my desktop and I want to be able to stick a tape in a drive and have it show up on my desktop like any other hard drive. And I get that. I can see where that would be really useful. And that is available now in something called Linear Tape File System, which is what LTFS is. So this is free software that you download and you install this file system on your computer. So if you have a Mac, your Mac has the HFS Plus file system on it. Now you've installed another one that just kind of sits there, and when you've got it on, your system is LTFS aware. So if I've got LTO hardware that's attached to my computer and I stick an LTFS formatted tape in there, it's formatted now. So that tape shows up on my desktop as a drive. It's pretty cool, and I can just copy files directly to it. So let's take a little bit of a shallow dive into what exactly is happening underneath the hood there. The magic of LTFS has to do with this partitioning. And so the very beginning of the tape, the first 50 gigabytes on an LTO-7 tape, is set aside for an index. And when you stick the tape in, the system knows to read that index, load it into RAM, and mount that image on your desktop. 50 gigabytes of an index does not consume 50 gigabytes of RAM, just so we're real clear. That's just the amount of space that's set aside on the tape for the index. And now, things pop up. I can browse through this. I can do a spotlight search through it because I've got that index loaded into RAM. It's going to be lightning fast. When I go to retrieve something, you're going to have the time that the tape takes to scan to where that data is located, and then it's going to read in at the blazing fast speed of 300 megabytes a second. But it's pretty slick. There's a couple of asterisks that I want to call people's attention to that have to do with the word linear. Okay? For those of us who are starting to feel a little old, we can all think back to those linear edit suites that had good sides and bad sides, all right? So if we take a look back at what's actually happening on tape, and on an LTO-7 tape, that's a piece of tape that's approximately 960 meters long, nothing short by any standard. If I have a file on there that is right here, and I delete that file, I do not get that space back. LTFS doesn't work that way. If I delete this file, if I delete this file, they come off the directory, but it's not like that space is liberated and I can go back and write to it again. That's not the way LTFS works. It's going to scan down to the last place it wrote a file and start writing new on fresh tape. If I have a Microsoft Word document that I have saved onto LTFS, then I make a change to it and save it again, it appears in the directory one time. It's actually taking up two different spots on my LTFS tape. The only way to reclaim that space is to reformat the tape and start over. As such, There's two main significant uses for LTFS. I think they're both really powerful. One is archiving, because I'm just gathering up a whole bunch of data and I'm going to write it to that tape and then I'm going to be done. And I'm going to take that tape out and my data is safeguarded and life is good. I don't need to do anything else. The other thing would be exchanging files, an excellent use for LTFS. When I have an LTFS tape that's LTO 7, I have a 6 terabyte thumb drive. I can put a 6 terabyte file on that tape, send it to my friend across town. He can stick it into his machine that is LTFS aware, and boom, it mounts up on the desktop. He can read that off. It's awesome for exchanging files. As you may have realized, when you're in an archiving kind of scenario, LTFS really is meant for smaller facilities where you're dealing with a smaller amount of data and you don't need to have a robot that is moving all these different tapes around. So at this point, you may say, you know what? I may be talked into it. I'm kind of turned on to LTO. What do I do now? And the first thing that you have to do is decide what your need is. Like, where do you fall in the spectrum? How much do you need to do? And I've got 3 little basic examples of how you might want to scale this stuff, because it's all modular. So if your needs are pretty small, you just need to archive, you've got those card images flying in or whatever, and you're looking at something on the order of less than 12 terabytes a week, so 2 LTO 7 cartridges, I can see going a totally LTFS route, buying a little M-Logic drive that just sits right there on your desktop, Thunderbolt cable over into your computer, job done. We're big fans of this software from this company, Imagine Products. They're out of Indianapolis, this pre-roll post software. So it does 2 major things. It gives you that all-important index. You know, for a bargain, $500, it gives you the searchable index of every tape that went through your LTFS system. That's the first major thing that it's going to do. And the second thing is that it handles illegal characters. What do I mean by that? Well, I love stories, and our fearless leader, John Z, he was, I think, the first person in the office to play around with LTFS. And he was so excited because we'd gotten the drive in from M-Logic and he plugged it into his computer and he installed the LTFS file system. He was not using pre-roll post or any other software, just mounting it on the desktop and going. And he copied over a big bunch of data and it got an hour in and it stopped. Minus 20. What the hell is a minus 20? I don't know. I'm Mac certified. I don't know what a minus 20 is. Tried it again. Got about an hour in and stopped. And there was all this troubleshooting, and is the drive bad, and working with the different vendors and changing out cables and all this stuff, software updates. And it turns out that there were some characters that the Mac, being so friendly, had no problem working with. You know, some oddball characters. But the LTFS standard doesn't support those characters. And so the system was erroring out on those characters because it didn't recognize them. But it didn't tell us that. So something like pre-roll post is great because it automatically translates those into something that is LTFS compliant. And then when you go to read that data back again, pre-roll post untranslates the characters and reads everything back properly. It's a beautiful thing. If your needs have scaled up just a little bit more, you know, Jay, I like robots, I like the robot idea, I need to work with a number of tapes and whatnot, I could see yourself going with a partially populated chassis from Spectralogic and running ArchiWare software on top of that. You know, whether it's backup or archive, your needs have increased. I'm now looking at somewhere less than 64 terabytes of storage. This is great because you can unarchive without having to shuffle tapes around and pull stuff off the shelf. You've got 10 there, plenty of storage, and it's all in one. If your needs are up even more than that, you're dealing with 100 terabytes of storage, you are really into your data. You know, let's set you up with 2 drives, fully populated licensed chassis, ArchiWare's backup and archive software, and you can do everything that you need to do all in one go. So at this point, I would like to thank you all for your kind attention, and I would like to open myself up for questions. I don't pretend to know everything. I don't think there is anyone on this planet who knows everything about a particular kind of technology. So if you came here to stump the chump, you're not going to have much trouble. You will be able to think of a question that I don't know the answer to. That said, I'm happy to tell you everything I know, and I'd like to thank you all very much and open it up for questions. Does anybody have any?